Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. Prepare to be pulled into an extraordinary journey as Kwame and the surviving villagers of Nia venture into a world marred by decay and shadows in their quest to end the curse plaguing their land. In these 5 gripping chapters, they'll traverse treacherous mountains, encounter wraiths made of pure malevolence, and confront the witch whose powers have corrupted everything. But as they move closer to the heart of darkness, the true horrors awaiting them are revealed. An ancient force far more powerful than the witch looms ahead, ready to strike. With spirits circling and the darkness threatening to consume them from within, Kwame must master his inner demons, or their world will be lost forever. The battle between hope and despair has never been more perilous. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the charred remains of Nia. The survivors, now a small band of weary souls, began their trek toward the distant mountains, where they hoped to find the source of the darkness that had consumed their village and taken their beloved leader, Nia. Kwame led the group, his steps heavy with the burden of responsibility. The words of Nia's ghostly apparition echoed in his mind, filling him with both fear and determination. The path they walked was treacherous, filled with unknown dangers, but he knew they had no other choice. The darkness was spreading, and it was up to them to stop it. The landscape around them was harsh and unforgiving. The once lush fields and forests were now withered and dead, as if the very life had been drained from the earth. The sky above was a sickly gray, with thick clouds that seemed to blot out the sun. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and an unnatural silence hung over the land. As they walked, Amina fell into step beside Kwame. Her eyes were red-rimmed from tears, but there was a steely resolve in her voice. "Do you think we can really do this, Kwame? What if the darkness is too strong?" Kwame didn't answer right away. He had the same doubts gnawing at him, but he couldn't afford to show it. He had to be strong for the others, even if he wasn't sure of the path ahead. "We have to believe we can," he said finally. "Nia believed in us. We owe it to her to try." Amina nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes remained. She reached up to touch the pendant around her neck, drawing comfort from its familiar presence. "We've lost so much already. I don't know if I can bear to lose anyone else." Kwame placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, Amina. We have to." The group continued in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The road ahead was long and perilous, and they all knew that not everyone would survive the journey. But the thought of failure, of allowing the darkness to consume everything they held dear, spurred them onward. As the day wore on, the terrain grew more rugged and difficult to navigate. The foothills of the mountains loomed before them, their jagged peaks disappearing into the dark clouds above. The air grew colder, and a biting wind swept down from the heights, chilling them to the bone. By nightfall, they reached a small plateau, where they decided to make camp. The survivors huddled together for warmth, their faces drawn and weary. The fire they lit was small, barely enough to ward off the cold, but it provided a flicker of hope in the oppressive darkness. As they sat around the fire, sharing what little food they had, Kwame took out the map Nia had left behind. It was old and tattered, the ink faded, but it was their only guide. He traced their route with his finger, noting the dangers that lay ahead. "We are close," he said, his voice low. "The entrance to the mountains is just a day's journey from here. But once we enter, there's no turning back. The others listened in silence, their faces grim. They had come this far, but the true test was still ahead of them. The mountains were a place of legend, said to be cursed, and few who entered ever returned. But they had no choice. As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside their small circle of light, Kwame felt a familiar unease settle over him. The darkness within him, which had been quiet for most of the day, now stirred rest. The next morning, the survivors broke camp at dawn, their breath visible in the frigid air as they prepared to enter the mountain pass. The path ahead was narrow and treacherous, winding through jagged rocks and steep cliffs that seemed to close in on them from all sides. A heavy sense of foreboding hung over the group as they ventured deeper into the mountains, where the light of day struggled to penetrate the thick clouds overhead. Kwame led the way, his eyes scanning the rocky terrain for any signs of danger. The map Nia had left them was their only guide, but it offered little comfort as they navigated the twisting paths and sheer drops that surrounded them. The air was thin and cold, making it difficult to breathe, and the wind howled through the narrow pass like the wails of the dead. As they climbed higher, the landscape grew even more desolate. The once verdant forests that had covered the lower slopes were replaced by barren rock and twisted, skeletal trees that seemed to reach out toward them like the grasping hands of the damned. The sky above was a dark, swirling mass of clouds that blocked out the sun, casting the world in an eerie, perpetual twilight. Amina, struggling to keep up with the group, stumbled over a loose rock and fell to her knees. Kwame was at her side in an instant, helping her to her feet. Her face was pale, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. "We need to rest," Amina whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I don't know how much further I can go." Kwame glanced around at the others, all of whom were equally exhausted. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow from lack of sleep and the ever-present weight of fear. He knew they couldn't afford to stop, but he also knew they wouldn't make it if they didn't take a moment to gather their strength. "We'll rest here," Kwame said, his voice firm. "But only for a short while. We can't stay in one place for too long. The darkness is following us, and we need to keep moving." The group huddled together in a small alcove, trying to find shelter from the biting wind. The rock walls around them offered little protection, but it was better than nothing. As they sat in silence, sharing what little food they had left, Kwame couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He scanned the surrounding rocks, his eyes narrowing as he caught movement in the shadows. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, an effect of the cold and exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. But then he saw it again, a flicker of movement, a dark shape that seemed to meld with the shadows themselves. "Did anyone else see that?" Kwame asked, his voice low and tense. The others looked up, their eyes darting nervously around the rocky outcroppings. Amina clutched her pendant tightly, her knuckles white with fear. "What did you see?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Kwame didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure what he had seen, but it had been real enough to send a chill down his spine. He reached for his spear, gripping it tightly as he stood, his muscles tensing in preparation for whatever was out there. Before he could move, the air around them seemed to shift, growing colder and thicker, as if a presence was pressing down on them. The shadows deepened, and the wind fell silent, leaving an eerie stillness that was more unsettling than the howling gales. And then they appeared. Out of the darkness, figures began to emerge, tall, twisted shapes that seemed to be made of the very shadows that surrounded them. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and their bodies were shrouded in tattered robes that billowed like smoke in the wind. Kwame's heart raced as he realized what they were facing. These were no ordinary beings, they were wraiths, creatures of pure darkness and malevolence, drawn to the presence of the living like moths to a flame. Amina gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "The witches' wraiths. They found us." Kwame didn't hesitate. "Everyone, get behind me. Don't let them touch you." The wraiths moved closer, their movements slow and deliberate, as if severing the fear that radiated from the survivors. Kwame felt the darkness within him stir, responding to the presence of the wraiths with a hunger that both terrified and exhilarated him. As the wraiths closed in, Kwame raised his spear, channeling the dark energy that had become a part of him since the ritual in the forest. The spear crackled with black lightning, the air around it humming with power. The lead wraith lunged at him, its claws outstretched, but Kwame was faster. He thrust the spear forward, the tip piercing the wraith's chest with a blinding flash of dark light. The creature let out a shriek that echoed through the mountains, its body convulsing as the darkness consumed it from within. But as the wraith dissolved into shadows, more took its place, surrounding the survivors in a tightening circle. Amina screamed as one of the wraiths reached for her, its claws inches from her face. Kwame didn't think, he just acted. With a roar, he unleashed a wave of dark energy, the force of it knocking the wraiths back and scattering them like leaves in the wind. The survivors, emboldened by Kwame's display of power, rallied and fought back, using whatever weapons they had to fend off the wraiths. But the battle was far from over. The wraiths were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless, and for every one they defeated, another would rise from the shadows to take its place. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a sudden gust of wind swept through the pass, scattering the wraiths like smoke. The shadows receded, and the wraiths let out a final, mournful wail before vanishing into the night. The survivors stood in stunned silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The wraiths were gone, but the damage had been done. They had barely survived the encounter, and the toll it had taken on them was clear. Kwame fell to his knees, his strength spent. The darkness within him pulsed with a dangerous intensity, threatening to consume him. He closed his eyes, fighting to regain control, but he knew that each time he used the dark power, it became harder to resist its pull. Amina knelt beside him, her eyes filled with concern. "Kwame, are you okay?" Kwame nodded, though his hands were trembling. "I'm fine. But we need to keep moving. The wraiths will be back, and we can't stay here." The survivors gathered their belongings and continued their journey, but the encounter with the wraiths had shaken them to their core. The path ahead was more dangerous than ever, and they knew that the deeper they ventured into the mountains, the closer they came to the source of the darkness. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far, and the fate of their world rested on their shoulders. They continued on, their footsteps echoing ominously off the cavern walls. The air grew colder with each step, the whispers around them intensifying, as if the very shadows were alive, mocking them, taunting them with their own fears. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves in a massive chamber, the ceiling so high it disappeared into the darkness above. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, carved from black stone and covered in ancient symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. The air around the altar was thick with power, a suffocating presence that pressed down on them, filling them with an overwhelming sense of dread. But it wasn't the altar that held their attention. It was the figure standing beside it. She was tall and gaunt, her skin as pale as bone and her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Her long, matted hair hung in tangled strands around her face, and her tattered robes seemed to shift and ripple as if they were alive. There was no doubt in their minds that this was the witch they had come to find, the source of the darkness that had plagued their world for so long. The witch's lips curled into a twisted smile as she looked at them, her voice a low, hissing whisper. "So, you've come at last. I've been waiting for you." Kwame stepped forward, his spear raised, his eyes narrowed in determination. "We've come to end this. Your reign of darkness ends today." The witch laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the chamber like the tolling of a funeral bell. "Fools. You think you can challenge me? I have lived for centuries, feeding on the fear and despair of mortals like you. You are nothing but insects to me, insignificant specks in the vastness of eternity." Amina stepped beside Kwame, her hand gripping her pendant so tightly that it cut into her palm. "We are not afraid of you," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "We've faced your wraiths, and we've survived. We will destroy you, and we will free our world from your curse." The witch's smile faded, her eyes narrowing as she studied them. "Oh, so you've tasted the darkness. I can feel it within you, growing stronger with each passing moment. But you do not understand what you've unleashed. The darkness is not your ally. It will consume you, just as it has consumed so many before you." Kwame tightened his grip on his spear, the dark energy within him pulsing in response to the witch's words. He could feel the power growing, a seething, writhing force that threatened to overtake him if he didn't keep it in check. But he couldn't afford to hold back now. This was their only chance. "Enough talk," Kwame said, his voice firm. "Let's end this." With a roar, Kwame charged at the witch, his spear crackling with dark energy. The others followed his lead, their weapons drawn, their faces set in grim determination. But as they closed in on the witch, she raised her hand, and the chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light. Kwame was thrown back, his body slamming into the hard stone floor with a force that drove the breath from his lungs. He struggled to his feet, his vision swimming, as the witch's laughter echoed around him. "You are strong," the witch said, her voice filled with dark amusement. "But you are still no match for me." Kwame looked around, his heart sinking as he saw the others lying motionless on the ground, their bodies battered and broken. He knew he had to act quickly, before the witch could finish them off. Drawing on every ounce of strength he had left, Kwame channeled the dark energy within him, letting it surge through his body like a tidal wave. The pain was excruciating, as if his very soul was being torn apart, but he forced himself to push through it, focusing all of his power on the witch. With a scream of pure rage, Kwame unleashed the full force of the darkness, sending a bolt of energy hurtling toward the witch. She raised her hand to deflect it, but the power was too great, and the energy struck her with a deafening explosion. For a moment, the chamber was silent, the air thick with the smell of burning flesh and the acrid tang of magic. Kwame fell to his knees, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the exertion. He looked up, expecting to see the witch lying defeated on the ground. But she was still standing. Though her robes were singed and her skin blistered from the attack, the witch was very much alive. Her eyes burned with fury, and the air around her crackled with dark energy. "You dare," the witch hissed, her voice filled with venom. "You dare to challenge me? I will show you the true meaning of despair." With a wave of her hand, the witch summoned a vortex of dark energy, the force of it pulling at Kwame, threatening to tear him apart. He could feel the darkness within him responding to the witch's power, the two forces colliding in a violent storm that threatened to consume him entirely. But Kwame refused to give in. He knew that if he lost control now, the darkness would win, and everything they had fought for would be lost. With a final, desperate effort, he forced the darkness back, focusing all of his energy on the witch. The two powers clashed in a blinding flash of light, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire world would be consumed by the storm. But then, with a deafening roar, the energy exploded outward, and the witch let out a scream of pure agony. When the light finally faded, the chamber was silent. The witch lay on the ground, her body charred and broken, the dark energy that had once sustained her now dissipated into the air. Kwame stood over her, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his body trembling from the effort it had taken to defeat her. But he knew it wasn't over yet. The witch's eyes fluttered open, her voice a weak, rasping whisper. "You cannot destroy me. The darkness is eternal." Kwame knelt beside her, his voice cold and unyielding. "No. The darkness may be eternal, but you are not." With those final words, Kwame plunged his spear into the witch's heart, and her body convulsed before going still. The air around them seemed to lighten, the oppressive darkness lifting as the witch's power finally faded into nothingness. But as the survivors began to stir, Kwame couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come at a terrible cost. The darkness within him was still there, a constant, knowing presence that he knew he could never fully escape. And as they made their way out of the cavern, the whispers followed them, a haunting reminder that the darkness was never truly gone. The survivors looked at each other, a mix of determination and dread in their eyes. They knew Kwame was right, they couldn't just sit back and watch their world crumble. But the idea of delving even deeper into the darkness, of facing whatever ancient force lay behind the curse, filled them with a sense of foreboding. Amina stepped forward, her hand still clutching the pendant she had worn since the beginning of their journey. The once warm and comforting object now felt cold against her skin, as though it, too, had been tainted by the darkness. "If there's a source," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her, "then it's likely somewhere deep, ancient, and protected. We need to go where the curse was born." Kwame nodded, though he knew this would mean venturing into places even the bravest warriors would fear to tread. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to falter at this stage. "We'll go to the heart of the curse," Kwame said, his voice resolute. "But we'll need to be prepared for whatever we might find there. The witch was powerful, but if there's something more, it's going to be beyond anything we've faced before." One of the survivors, an elder named Bako, who had once been a healer in their village, spoke up. "There are legends of a place where the earth meets the spirit world, a place of great power and great danger. It is said that the boundary between life and death is thin there, and those who enter may never return. If the curse has a source, it could be there." The group fell silent, the weight of Boko's words sinking in. The place he spoke of was known only in whispers, a place feared and revered by those who knew of its existence. It was a place where the bravest warriors and wisest elders dared not venture, for the risks were too great, the rewards too uncertain. But Kwame knew they had no choice. If they didn't take this risk, their world would be consumed by the curse, then everything they had fought for would be lost. "Then that's where we'll go," Kwame said, his voice filled with grim determination. "We'll find the source of the curse, and we'll destroy it, no matter the cost." Amina looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "We are with you, Kwame. We'll face whatever comes together." The others nodded in agreement, their expressions mirroring Amina's. They had come this far together, and they would see this journey through to the end, no matter what awaited them in the depths of the curse. As they prepared to leave, Bako approached Kwame, his old eyes filled with concern. "Remember, Kwame, the darkness is powerful, and it will try to corrupt you, to turn you against those you care about. Stay strong, and don't let it consume you." Kwame nodded, though he could feel the darkness within him stirring, a constant, nagging presence that threatened to overwhelm him. He knew Boko was right, if he wasn't careful, the darkness could easily take control, turning him into something as twisted and evil as the witch they had just defeated. But Kwame also knew that he had no choice but to use the darkness. It was the only weapon they had against the curse, the only thing that could give them a fighting chance. He would just have to keep it in check, to make sure that he controlled the darkness, and not the other way around. With that resolve, the group set off once more, their journey taking them ever deeper into the unknown. The landscape around them grew more twisted and corrupted with each step, the trees gnarled and blackened, the air thick with the stench of decay. The ground beneath their feet was soft and treacherous, as though the very earth was rotting away. But they pressed on, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that this was their last hope. If they couldn't find the source of the curse and destroy it, then all was lost. After several days of traveling through the corrupted land, they finally reached the place Boko had spoken of, a desolate, barren plain where the sky seemed to hang low, and the air was thick with the presence of death. In the distance, they could see a massive stone structure rising from the earth, its surface covered in strange, pulsating symbols that seemed to writhe and shift as they watched. "This is it," Boko said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The place where the earth meets the spirit world. The source of the curse is inside." Kwame felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the structure, a deep sense of foreboding settling over him. This was it, the final confrontation, the place where their journey would end, one way or another. Without another word, they made their way toward the structure, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. As they reached the entrance, a massive stone door that seemed to pulse with dark energy, Kwame could feel the darkness within him growing stronger, feeding off the power of the place. He knew that this was it, the moment of truth. If they were going to succeed, they would need to be stronger than ever before, both in body and spirit. They would need to fight not just the curse, but the darkness within themselves. Taking a deep breath, Kwame pushed open the door, and they stepped into the darkness beyond. The interior of the structure was like nothing they had ever seen. The walls were made of a strange, pulsating material that seemed to shift and move like living flesh. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floor beneath their feet was soft and uneven, as though they were walking on the surface of a great, living creature. As they moved deeper into the structure, the light from the entrance faded, leaving them in complete darkness. But the walls seemed to emit a faint, eerie glow, casting long, shifting shadows that danced around them, making it impossible to tell where the walls ended and the shadows began. Amina clutched her pendant tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting for them, watching them, from the moment they had entered the structure. "This place, it's alive," she whispered, her voice trembling. Kwame nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. "Stay close. We don't know what we're dealing with here." As they continued deeper into the structure, the walls seemed to close in around them, the air growing thicker and more suffocating. The ground beneath their feet became sticky, as though they were walking on a thick layer of blood or tar. Suddenly, the air was filled with a low, rumbling growl, and the ground beneath them began to shake. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, the symbols glowing brighter and brighter until they were blinding. Kwame raised his hand to shield his eyes, but the light was too intense, searing through his skin and into his very soul. He could feel the darkness within him reacting to the light, twisting and writhing like a living thing, trying to break free. And then, with a deafening roar, the light exploded outward, engulfing them in a blinding flash of energy. When the light finally faded, they found themselves standing in a vast, empty void, the walls and floor of the structure gone, replaced by an endless expanse of darkness. The air was cold and still, the silence oppressive. Kwame looked around, his heart racing as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. They were no longer in the structure, of that he was certain. But where they were now, he had no idea. Amina stepped closer to him, her eyes wide with fear. "What is this place?" Kwame shook his head, his mind racing. "I don't know. But we are not alone." As if in response to his words, the darkness around them began to shift and move, taking on shapes and forms that were both familiar and alien. Faces appeared in the darkness, twisted and grotesque, their eyes filled with malice and hunger. "These are the spirits," Boko said, his voice trembling. "We are in their world now. This is where the curse was born." Kwame felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the spirits, their twisted forms writhing and shifting in the darkness. He could feel their power, their hatred, their desire to consume and destroy. And he knew that if they didn't act quickly, they would be lost forever in the darkness. "We have to find the source," Kwame said, his voice firm. "We have to destroy it before the spirits can take us." The spirits began to close in around them, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. Kwame could feel the darkness within him responding to the spirits, feeding off their power, growing stronger with each passing moment. But he knew he couldn't let the darkness take control. If he did, they would all be lost. "Stay close," he said, his voice tense. "We need to find the source and destroy it before it's too late." The group moved forward, their steps slow and cautious, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the source. The spirits continued to circle around them, their whispers filling the air with a low, sinister hum. As they ventured deeper into the void, the darkness seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive, the disturbing. As Kwame and group venture deeper into the void, the darkness seemed to grow thicker and more oppressive. Will they make it? Join us on the next episode to find out.